Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Briefing Room podcast. This is episode 5 with Saira Botla. So, today we're with Miss Kristina Tesser Derksen, the Honourable Member of Parliament for Milton and part of the Liberal Party of Canada. Now, before we dive into political issues, I'd love to start with your personal journey. So, how did you first become interested in politics and what motivated you to run for office?
Well, thanks so much. It's great to be here. And what got me interested in politics? I think from a very young age, I was interested in the types of ways that people arrange themselves in society and the rules that we all agree to live by, and whether it's laws or it's policies, they kind of come together in what we call politics. So this is something I've kind of looked back on and reflected on and seen that journey kind of evolved. And then when I was in school, I took a special interest in history and law and civics. And then I went to university and took a political science degree. It was a joint specialist degree with history and political science. And then I'm just a half credit short of a minor degree in history of religions, and pursued a career in law and continued to be a lawyer. But I got thinking more about how I could be more involved on a grassroots level, right? Rather than just kind of a legal way or something that's a little more high level, how I could really get involved with my community. And there happened to be a municipal election around that same time that I was thinking about this. And after talking to a few people and looking into what the job entailed, I decided to put my name forward, and I ran in my first municipal election in 2018. And I was successful, and I was elected. Yeah, I was elected as a municipal councillor. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that was quite exciting. Yeah, and I'm also thinking of doing my political science journey and maybe becoming a lawyer and then heading into politics. Now, I'd like to know, what was the biggest surprise when you entered politics? Like, what was your kind of your first shock? Like, you didn't know before, you know?
I think when I was first elected as a municipal councillor, one of the big surprises was that you don't take a course in how to be a politician, right? There's no school that you go to. There's no guidebook per se. I mean, there are kind of instructional stories and things that you can avail yourself of, but there's no way that you learn, and there's no right way or wrong way, I guess, to learn how to be a politician, how to represent people. So I guess that was a bit of a shock, and really I shouldn't have been surprised, but it really is like you get elected, you get a little bit of an orientation from the staff at the town or the federal government or wherever it is you're representing. And then you kind of go on your way and figure out how you go about representing people effectively. And a lot of it is stuff that you have to figure out on your own. There's a lot of relationship building, which is really important because you rely so much on your fellow colleagues and staff and folks that you can just call up and ask a question if you need an answer to something you don't know. So I think that's what kind of surprised me the most, which is kind of silly because, again, it should have been something that I expected. Just like there's no way to learn how to be an effective politician from a book, you're kind of on your own to figure out how to do it effectively. Yeah.
Own footsteps and learning as you go, learning on the
That's
job.
right.
Now,
Self-directed. Mm-hmm.
yes, yeah. Now, if I may ask you, what was life before politics? How did it differ and how did it change after you entered politics? Because obviously you got to make some sacrifices and you got to have some discipline and stuff like that.
Sure. I would say when you get into politics, a big change you may find is that you are all of the sudden, you belong to a lot of people, I'll say. Your time becomes very precious and people want it. I would say a politician's greatest asset or commodity, aside from their reputation and integrity, would be their time. So you can be scrutinized pretty ruthlessly as well. Not so much at the municipal level because there aren't parties at the municipal level, but still, once you get into provincial or federal politics where you're now affiliated with a party, the scrutiny that can come that you're subjected to can be quite significant. So, they talk all the time about politicians having a thick skin and, you get called names and all that. That's something that I think, didn't exist in my prior life at all. And now simply by the mere fact that I'm affiliated with a party and I'm an elected person, regardless of whether or not someone knows any iota about me, they will brand me a certain way or they will have a certain opinion about me, whether it's positive or negative. And some of them let me know in a very direct way. So that's very different. A life in politics it's a very public life, right? And there's definitely sacrifices people make. People who work in all kinds of lines of work make sacrifices, let's face it. But your family has to be aware that they could also be subject to unfair scrutiny or unfair attention. So I would say that's the most different thing, is that your time is not necessarily your own anymore. It belongs to the people you represent, and that you can be subjected to lots of scrutiny and criticism, some of it fair, a lot of it not.
Yes, I guess that is true because like a lot of your time is the people's time. The people require your time, and yes, I do agree with you. In federal level politics, you can be scrutinized a lot, and the opposition can scrutinize you, and there's a lot of stuff that are involved. Now, if I may, like as part of the governing party, as part of the liberal party, in your opinion, what is the most important issue Canada's facing right now, and how do you think, yeah, we can push forward and kind of improve that issue?
Yeah, it's always tough to nail it down to one most important issue
Yeah.
because different things are important to different people, right? And all of them are valid. I would say if we're going to step back and look at it from a really high level, from a national level, I have to bifurcate it into two issues, right? Because we have those issues at home, the things that we call, like pocketbook issues, affordability. Affordability, and in that, I would say the economy in general. So affordability, jobs, industry, the economy. I think that's a big issue, and that's really one of the issues our leader, I think, got elected because he's the expert to handle those types of issues. And then we also exist in a world with other countries, right? So there's an international element here, and that again I think feeds back into the issue of the economy because we're facing some economic challenges, yes, and uncertainty because of a relationship we had with another country, the United States, that is kind of, our neighbors that have kind of upended a trade relationship that we were reliant on. And that feeds into the economic pressures we feel in our daily lives as well. So, I would say the biggest issue that this government is facing, Canadians in general are facing, is an economy that needs to be revamped. And in many ways, our Prime Minister is doing that, and I think doing it quite well as he can with the resources he has and the time that he's had, and making sure that we hold our place in the world as a medium power. And also making sure there's bridges that we don't burn. Like there's relationships we need to continue to have with the United States, absolutely. But there's something we've learned from this. Yeah, there's something we've learned from this situation. It's that we can't be too reliant on one particular partner or friend. And I think our Prime Minister's done an excellent job of going abroad to other like-minded nations and finding affinities with them where we can benefit from each other and build up our economies without putting all our eggs in one basket.
Yes, I've actually tracked our Prime Minister's performance in the last couple months, and I feel he's doing a good job with going to India, getting us a $2.1 billion uranium deal, getting us a deal from China, Australia, all over the world. He's been diversifying our, our trade partners and stuff. Now, this is a question that's related to your answer. Like global conflicts and economic pressures rising around the world, right? And international landscape is being changed almost every day, I guess we can say, right? Now, how should Canada balance its global commitments with domestic affordability at home? Like, how do you think we should balance the global and the domestic commitments we have?
Yeah, and that's an important question, not just for someone in a leadership position, but for a political party that ultimately would like to get reelected, right? What do we need to do now to assure Canadians that, number one, we have their best interests at heart. Number two, we are going to do our best to make sure Canada stands in a place of respect in the global sphere. And I think you saw a lot of that kind of elucidated in our Prime Minister's speech in Davos, right? I mean, he talked about this. He said, it was a wonderful speech. Thank you. And he said, this is the global reality. And I think it was very sobering to hear him, but it was something we needed to hear. And for him to say, we need to make plans and operate in the world as it is, not in the world we wish we had. We can be idealistic. We can have ideals and work towards those democratic ideals or ideals of fair trade with all of our partner nations. certainly we need to have those types of goals, but when we have a superpower like the United States that's shifted the ground beneath us, we need to react, and we need to be practical and put plans in place to address the reality that we're facing right now. So in the short term, I think it's important that we, number one, recognize the reality in which we find ourselves, and number two, be practical and understand that we can continue to hold the values that make us Canadian, but we need to be more pragmatic in how we approach some of our other trade relationships. So I think Canada has to do those two things: balance the values and ideals that make us uniquely Canadian and that really draw a lot of respect from other countries around the world, and also be practical and realize that things aren't always going to go our way. We have to have contingency plans for when things go sideways on us, and we can maximize the rich resources, whether it's the people or the critical minerals and the natural resources we have in this country. We can utilize those for our own benefit, and we can do it in a way that's responsible and that upholds our values of environmental preservation and building our economy as well. There's a way to do it. There's a way for it to be done.
Yes, I agree with you. There's definitely a way to get it done. And Canada has so many natural resources. For example, up north we have uranium, lithium. We have tons of oil we can sell in international markets in the West. Now I have another question for you. The world feels more divided than it ever has, right? How should Canada respond to that global polarization, and how can Canadian youth, like us, the youth, play a role in shaping the future of international politics?
It's really such an important question. And I remember being a young person and thinking, I've got all these opinions, and I think I have something to contribute, but feeling like, oh, who am I? I'm just some kid. That's really not the right approach to take for young people. And I would say, make sure your voices are heard. Reach out to your elected representatives, because we do care about our youth. I have 4 young adult children. I'm living the struggles that they live as well. You're quite right to point out that there has been an increase in polarization across the world. We've seen the rise of populist governments in countries around the world, including our neighbor to the south. It's concerning. I, as a student of political science and history, I think it is beneficial to step back sometimes and take a macro view of things, because these patterns do repeat themselves throughout history. It's really important for people to know their history, right? Because that's how you recognize the patterns, and you can swerve sometimes to avoid some of the calamity that you might be headed towards when you recognize where it's going. And I do see that with some of these populist governments that are coming up. And populism kind of thrives in this place where we other people. We point a finger and we blame and we scapegoat, and then you end up creating more divisiveness. It happens in times of economic challenge. Yeah, that's right. When people are feeling pinched, when people are feeling that they're being treated unjustly by the economy or by the government, and it's much easier and much simpler to just say it's because of this one thing and blame it on this one thing. And then you end up creating a narrative that divides people. And then people get into, identity politics and all this other stuff, which can be very damaging, rather than focusing their energy on the actual issues. Yeah, on the solution. And so I think it was great when you saw this kind of groundswell of patriotism coming from Canadians last year, and all of a sudden it's like, we're going to band together. We're under, kind of a form of attack by the United States, and we're going to make sure that there's strength in numbers, and we're going to make sure we maximize our strength in numbers. That has waned a little bit, and part of it is political. I think what we have to do to fight against that is make sure we're keeping our eyes on the big picture. We're all Canadians. We're all in it for the same reasons. We want prosperity and peace for our country. And also making sure we're careful about how we consume information, because what I'm finding in this job that's been very challenging is that there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation. And if people haven't developed the requisite critical thinking skills and analytical reasoning skills, they have a hard time determining what they're consuming is true, whether it's true or not, right? And so people sometimes don't stop to think, does this really make sense? Like, I don't know if this is logical, because they may have a value that they believe in innately, and that the thing they're reading reinforces. So they want to believe it. So they tend to be less critical. I'm finding that's a real problem because I'm getting really reasonable, smart people who are really, community minded, engaged, and who are calling me asking all kinds of questions that are kind of bizarre sometimes, to be frankly, and it's coming from information they're getting from sources that have a very clear political agenda. So I encourage people, young people included, when you have questions or when you see things online, you're consuming, videos on YouTube or whatever, if something seems off about it, trust your instincts, check your values, and think, okay, am I bringing up value bias to this? Am I being logical? Am I being critical? And call your elected representative. Sometimes they can assist you. Ask them questions. Again, we're political as well, so you have to take that with a grain of salt and understand that sometimes you get a political answer. But I think it's really important that people keep in mind not all the information they're getting is 100% or even 50% or sometimes not at all accurate.
Yeah. So I actually agree with you, actually. So like in my law class, I'm currently taking law class right now. My law teacher was telling me how she knows way too much about history and she sees a pattern, right? So essentially, populism rises when there's economic uncertainty and things like that. And there's some political leaders out there that take advantage of it and they spread propaganda and they essentially divide the country. And for example, like yesterday, I was reading some posts, right, and someone said our honorable Prime Minister Mark Carney was in the Epstein files, and I was like, what? And I went and I researched it immediately. He was not even in it, first of all. Like, he was in it, but like that's because he was part of a newsletter where he, like, when he was governor of Bank of Canada, he was giving financial information. He was no way involved, right? So this is how like propaganda spread, and I think we should fact check it before we believe into it and kind of go on and
It's true. Yeah. And I think there's a role to play, certainly a big role to play for these people that are spreading this, right? So, I mean, and media has a role to play too. Like you have a headline that says, Mark Carney appears in Epstein files. Okay, well, automatically someone who dislikes the prime minister already is going to say, I knew it, he's, someone else might say, wait a minute, that doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense. Let me look into this like you did. And then you see, oh, it was like a random form newsletter that through his, position at whatever investment bank he might have been working at the time. So, I mean, that's important. Those are important questions to ask. And I think it was smart of you to give that a critical eye. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah. And I have another question. Do youth voices actually influence federal decision making, or are they mostly symbolic? For example, I know this isn't federal, like this provincial issue that came up, the OSAP cuts by Premier Doug Ford, right? And like I and my other friends, we went and we protested against those OSAP cuts. But like, do you think they actually influence policy making at a federal level?
Yeah, they do. Absolutely, they do. I think it's really important that youth feel heard and understand that they also have power in numbers, right? And you might get the odd politician who's like, oh, they don't vote. Youth don't come out and vote. Well, that's one thing. That's a power you can exercise as a young person once you reach the age of 18. Go out and vote. And, when there's a government in place that has a 4-year term and you're 16 years old, you can say, look, your election's coming up in 2 years. I'll be of voting age and I'm going to remember how you dealt with this policy issue that's really important to me. And if you don't get everything you ask for, you should at least feel like the elected representative or the government of the day heard you and gave you time and took your concern into consideration and thought about it when they were making the policy. Youth definitely have a voice. There's a lot of youth movements actually happening at the political level. So, lots of youth joining political parties or forming a youth branch of a particular political party. We saw that in the past election that a lot of young people were getting involved a lot more than they had in the past with both parties. And, don't forget that young people usually have older family members, whether they're parents or older siblings or aunts and uncles or grandparents that do vote. And I know when I voted, when my kids were too young to vote, I voted thinking about the issues that would affect them ultimately, like OSAP, for example, or education or jobs, right? So it's important that youth understand that they have a role to play, a big role to play. And really the policies that, particularly at the federal level that we're looking at now, the policies that we're trying to get rolling aren't necessarily going to have a big impact until people your age are well into adulthood, right? So we're planning for the future. These are things we're doing for folks your age and younger as well.
Yes, that's an amazing answer. For example, with the OSAP cuts, I've contacted MPPZ Hamid and wrote him a letter, and he's actually gave me time and he's responded to it, which I kind of felt like my time was valued and stuff. So
Yeah.
I would say that makes a huge difference. And our next question, moving to Milton, what do you think some of the biggest challenges the community is facing right now? Obviously, you were a counselor for town of Milton before. And what do you think some of the challenges we're facing right now and we should tackle? How do you think we should tackle them and kind of approach them?
Yeah, when I was a counselor at the town of Milton, I would say that the big issue for the town was growth, and it has been growth, I would say, for the past 20 years, really. That's been the issue. Particularly now, what we're finding is that with a lot of new residential development, people are moving here from places like Mississauga or Brampton, where they're used to having a high level of community services. And they're not necessarily finding them here in Milton. So community centers, so that there's sports and March break programs, for example, for kids. Transit is a really big one. I would say, when you're talking about folks who move to Milton, that sometimes is a shocker for them to realize that the transit system is not quite up to speed to where it needs to be in order to move people around effectively in our town. A lot of folks still have cars, and you get out there at rush hour and it's pretty tough to move around in an efficient way, not to mention the environmental impacts that all those vehicles on the road have. So I would say transit is going to be a flashpoint for the town of Milton as far as its longer term strategic plans. And I do know that the staff at the town and the council are now focused on investing in transit and bringing that investment level up to a place where it's adequate for the population we have, rather than under investing as may have been in the case in the past. So I would say that's the big issue, and everything kind of moves around that. When you have high density housing like condominium buildings, it's a lot of cars and people in a small place. You need to move them around effectively. You really can't do that without effective public transit.
Yes, I definitely agree with you. Public transit has been a huge issue. Also, some youth programs have been a huge issue, as I feel like youth in Milton don't have enough programs or enough stuff that appeal to them. Now, our next question, how is the federal government supporting the growth of Milton and our population growth and investments in Milton and vice versa?
Yeah, it gets a little bit complicated because you have multiple levels of government involved here, right? So the municipality is basically created by the province. So the provincial government creates a municipality to run kind of their local areas, and the province will dictate to the municipality certain things that need to be done. So for example, when you talk about housing, the province will tell the town of Milton, you need to build X number of residential units in the next 20 years. We don't care how you do it, just make sure the units are built. So then it comes to the municipality to say, okay, well, if we build high density condo units, we can fit more of those units into a smaller footprint, rather than having, lots of single detached homes, which people aren't necessarily buying as much now. And then those high density homes will help service the transit we want to bring in. So you've got the provincial government doing that. Part of what funds a municipality, aside from property taxes, are things called development charges, which developers pay when they come in and want to build these condos or housing developments. So in order to encourage more housing being built, which we do need, the province and the federal government to an extent have proposed that those development charges should be reduced. So now the builders are more incentivized to build housing, but now the municipality has less money. At the same time, the provincial government recently has given more responsibilities to the municipality to manage, as far as their economic development, managing wastewater and storm management and other things like that, but not given them as any additional money. So the municipality now has to do more with less money, essentially. So what the federal government has done to help municipalities with developing and building more housing, which we told them we need, is produce a community infrastructure fund. So there's about $50 billion available for the Building Community Strong Fund, we call it. So this is money that municipalities can apply to the federal government to have infrastructure built in their communities that will support housing. There was a housing accelerator fund in the previous term, and I know Milton got a whole bunch of money from that to help build supportive housing infrastructure. And in that particular instance, they put it towards transit. So now that they have money to invest in transit, more effective transit means you can build more housing and not worry about the gridlock that would come from the resulting traffic. So that infrastructure fund is the federal government's answer to address things like the infrastructure that municipalities need in order to get the housing built. There's also a portion of that $5 billion for health infrastructure. So health is squarely within the jurisdiction of the province, right? The province of Ontario is supposed to do which they get. There's federal transfers the province gets, and they run out the health operations, right, with that money. What the federal government has done is found some money in the Housing and Infrastructure Ministry, not through health, but through housing and infrastructure, and said, hey, we've got some money here which we can give directly to health infrastructure projects. So if there is a hospital that needs some money for capital construction, or in the example of Milton and Georgetown, we're trying to build a palliative care hospice. So this is a place, a specific residence that has medical capabilities to help people when they have a terminal illness and they can die there, right? In palliative care, it's called. And they can have all the care and service they need there. So this is something that this fund could potentially go towards helping construct. So that's another way to support communities and the needs that they have as they build more housing, which again, the province and the federal government have asked them to do.
That's amazing. Now, this is our next and final question. Do you have any advice for the young people of Canada watching this podcast right now? And let's say someone like me, and in the future I want to get involved in federal level politics. What steps should be taken? What are some barriers to entry for us that we should be prepared for?
Okay, steps you can take. I think it's great to get involved young, just reading the news. As simple as that. Find several reliable news sources and read a variety of news so that you know what's going on in your world and what your government is doing. You can join a political party if that's the way you want to go. If at the federal level, certainly you could, investigate which political party aligns best with your values and your beliefs and the direction that you think the country should go. You can volunteer for candidates. And when election time comes, and even between elections, you can go out and knock doors with the candidate. Or with your member of parliament, for example, or with your MPP. They'll go out and knock doors outside of the election period, just as the elected person for all the riding. It doesn't matter the party, you're still represented by the person that's been elected. And you can knock doors and help hand out literature and ask people if there's issues and help your elected representative that way. And that gets you involved. Then when election is called, you're in a campaign mode, and I'll tell you, we're always looking for young people to help us knock doors, hand out literature, and work on the campaign. And that is a really exciting time to be involved in politics because things are dynamic, they're moving quickly, there's lots of cool people coming through the office, and you really get an interesting taste for how an election is run. And I would say that's a great way to start, volunteering. And if you're not interested in volunteering for a political party, just volunteer. Pick an organization in your community that needs help or that you're interested in, and it will really help you see how people organize at a grassroots level with minimal resources, and it will give you a new way to look at your community. And I find that volunteering really gives people a sense of purpose. And even though you might not be getting money from it, you're getting a lot of value out of a volunteer experience. And, if the first one doesn't work out and you don't like it, try again. There's lots of wonderful organizations. Barriers for young people, there's pressures for young folks as well, right? They're thinking about school. They want to get into a particular college program or particular university. They've got exams, they've got school. They might have a part-time job. They have family things they're trying to balance. Maybe they have, a relationship that they're dealing with too. And then there's all of this social media in front of them. I wouldn't say these are barriers necessarily, but they're challenges, and they're challenges on your time as a young person and on your mental space, right? It can eat up a lot of energy. So I think a challenge for young people is to learn how to manage all of that. Time management is really important. It's important skill for anyone, and particularly for someone who wants to be in politics. And I think, though, there's more opportunities than there are barriers for young people if they're willing to pick up the phone or shoot off an email. And sometimes you might be discouraged because you might not get an answer right away, but keep trying. There will be someone who who catches your email and responds, and would be happy to have you help them out and learn.
Thank you very, very much, Miss Kristina Tesser Derksen. I'd like to wrap up our podcast, and this has been a really good episode with you, and you gave me like some really good advice with time management. You've talked really well about the Carney government and how they've been performing really well internationally and globally. And thank you very, very much for doing an episode with us today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.